Myth 1. Age. You're not too old. Yeah, even you. And I'm not just saying this because my 97-year-old grandmother has a Duolingo streak that will make you cry. Not only is there a robust body of evidence that language study has all sorts of other benefits, like staving off dementia, but also you can learn a language at any age. Now, it's going to be harder. Regardless what influencers tell you, you can't actually learn like a baby. I'll probably make a video about that. There's a ton of empirical evidence that there's just a different kind of neuroplasticity that children have that sets their language learning apart from adult learning. So when your brain is done cooking and is ready for actual adult use, that's around 22 in women and 25 in men, insert your own joke here, it's going to be a little harder than if you had early childhood exposure to that language. But we also have better logic and pattern recognition and know how to set goals and use day planners and so on. So it's kind of a wash. Children's learning does border on magical, but it also takes a long ass time, and after 5 years of full-time language learning with 24/7 exposure, they only talk at the level of a 5-year-old. Lame. Kids are dumb. Now, if you want to sound like you always spoke that language, you're going to have to do a PhD in acoustic phonetics, totally understand physiology and sociolinguistics, and probably also join a spy agency or something. But if you want to speak well and clearly and understandably at the level of an intelligent adult, that's totally doable. And in 5 years with appropriate study methods, time management, and linguistic input, you should be speaking way better than a 5-year-old. It's like Aaliyah said, age ain't nothing but a number. I will say, learning a language does entail learning a new set of interlocking conceptual patterns. So the longer you've used just one for everything in your life, the more challenging and rewarding it will be to learn another, or even learn the underlying systems that your one way of doing things is built on. It's all about embracing a growth mindset. Myth 2, immersion. You do not need to immerse yourself to learn a language. Most multilingual people in the history of the world did not. And in fact, all those people telling you full immersion is the only way to learn are completely abusing the term. They end up describing reading books or listening to podcasts without translation. That's not full immersion. Full immersion is being dropped off in Paris and having nobody speak to you in English for anything, ever. I think it comes from two related issues. The first is that misunderstanding of immersion, and the second is the correct idea that you should avoid translating through your L1. What does that mean? Let's say you're learning French. A lot of people have a mental block when they first study a new language where they want to process all of the information, that is, think, in English, and then do some computation to translate to French or whatever else. What this means is that instead of directly mapping a new label to a concept like un chat, instead, people want to map words to words, like un chat means a cat. This is already super duper slow if you're trying to have a conversation, but it completely falls apart once you start to get beyond naming the kinds of things you see in books for toddlers. So, do you have to immerse yourself? No. You don't even have to avoid translation all the time. But it will be much, much more effective to try to ditch translations as soon as you can when learning new things. For something like je vais m'installer ici, you can get that install myself actually means sit, but trying to use it all the times you say sit in English doesn't work. Nor does it work to try to map installer to every possible English meaning. In this case, it's more useful to recognize that that whole phrase is the kind of thing that you say in a particular social setting, doing a particular thing. This is where devouring tons of content, whether it's video, podcasts, books, or whatever, comes in handy. But reading a lot and translating very little is actually just called reading a lot, not immersion. People love to oversell their approaches. Myth number 3, grammar. Hilariously, YouTube's stupid LLM wanted me to make an entire video about how grammar doesn't matter and that the importance of grammar is a myth. After all, that's the kind of thing that people say in videos that do well. Well, buckle up, chucklefuck, because that's back-asswards. I gotta stop watching Physics Duck. Here's the deal. Grammar is the rules of the road. It's how all the pieces fit together. Can you make yourself understood with just a jumble of words? All the nouns in the wrong places and with the wrong case marking and verbs conjugated wrong? Like to claim can you people that, but bullshit. Oh, I'm sorry, I meant people like to claim that you can, but that's bullshit. Now here's the problem. As with all of these, there's a tiny little kernel of truth here that some of you need. I've told this story before, but one of the ways my wife, who got straight A's in high school French for 4 solid years, actually got herself speaking French was a bit of a mean trick I played on her. We visited my family, and I faked a stomach bug. I literally just read in the bathroom for a while. You have to know 2 things to know why this worked. First, my aunt does not speak a lick of English. She's like Inspector Clouseau.
Hamburger.
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 I would like to buy a hamburger.
I would like to buy a hamburger.
And second, my wife knew enough to communicate, but she was paralyzed by conjugating things perfectly in her head. You know, the silent letters. Like, does this get a silent S at the end or a silent T? After all, she'd been taught that that was extremely important. So there's a sweet spot. You should absolutely learn how to correctly communicate the ideas you have with the appropriate structures. But you also don't need to know every structure in the language to be able to improvise and adapt, and start a YouTube channel where you shock natives. And if you pay attention to context, you can often figure out a lot of what's happening, even if you're not catching all the grammar or every word. But make no mistake, this is not speaking and understanding the language well. This is getting by despite not speaking well. So yeah, grammar matters, but don't be paralyzed by that fact. Just, learn it. But don't let still being in the process of learning it trick you into thinking that you can't understand anything yet. There's a lot you can get by with. Myth number 4, talent. This is really about setting up structure and consistency so you can just keep moving towards the goal even if you take some side excursions. Anyway, the name of the game is motivation, effort, strategy, and consistency for language learning success. It's a really long name. And motivation is something that's kind of about routine and strategy anyway. What definitely doesn't work is beating yourself up for not feeling motivated. I've got some tips in other videos, and I'll probably make a dedicated video soon, but successful language study is a marathon, not a sprint. But marathons also, have a finish line. At a certain point, if you're not actually moving, you're not running the NYC Marathon, you just live in the Bronx. Don't live in the Bronx. But things like a short-term achievable goal, setting aside a specific time to get there and incentivizing that routine, say with a coffee and a cookie and a comfortable place to study, all that stuff will all help with motivation and successful outcomes, along with self-care. You're not going to learn as much if you're sleep deprived and malnourished. And are there people who are just better at learning languages and who do so faster? They're just wired that way? Unless your name is Richard Simcott or Luca Lamparelli, then yes, definitely. So what? You don't need to worry about them. Do you. It's like Danny Glover said, don't be mad because I'm doing me better than you doing you. Just go do you. Myth 5. Vocab. This is another where YouTube's LLM is wrong, and that means you're going to be getting a lot of confidently incorrect information in this domain on YouTube. Specifically, people will tell you that vocabulary is not important. Hogwash. That word, hogwash, appears about 7 times in 100 million words, according to the OED. So if you don't learn enough vocabulary, how would you understand what I meant other than by context clues? Is it really going to help you if I explain by telling you that it means the same as if I called it balderdash? But there is, again, kernel of truth. Sometimes people focus on vocabulary at the expense of everything else, and they do so in a way that's frankly stupid. Other languages are not simply a cipher for English or whatever your first language is. And for English speakers, learning closely related languages that there's been a lot of exchange with, languages like German and Dutch or French and Spanish, there are a lot of words that effectively mean exactly the same thing and sound a lot alike. So you can fall into the trap of mapping table to tisch or table or mesa and then thinking that we can do the same thing for more advanced vocabulary. But very quickly things start to balloon out of control. What are all the meanings of put in English? And when you learn a word that overlaps with some but not all of them, like le'aniach in Hebrew or posé in French, what do you do? If you're just mapping words to words, what you actually do is end up with a bunch of flashcards with put on one side and different words in your target language on the other. And some of those different words might also be mapped to multiple English words on the first side of the flashcard with a bunch of different flashcards. It's a mess. On top of that, words aren't enough. They fit together into phrases and sentences, that is, larger and larger structures. They're not always decomposable either. So you can know kick and bucket, but not know what it means to kick the bucket. Or walk and eggshells, well, you get the idea. So we have to learn vocabulary, but I really want to emphasize the importance of understanding language structure and context. And to learn that vocabulary and be able to use it, we should be actively listening, reading, and speaking in real-world communicative contexts, or at a minimum, including a nod to them. So if you're going to do flashcards with vocabulary because, spaced repetition is effective for learning, have the words you're learning in context too. Ideally, you should learn vocabulary through real-world situations and engage in content, like today's sponsor. So let's conclude and summarize. You should embrace effective strategies for language learning success. You're not too old. That's a myth. You don't need full immersion or nothing, and most of the people selling you on full immersion have completely redefined the word to be practically meaningless. You do need to learn grammar, but you should be able to get a good reference and bang that out quickly. If you're just doing grammar exercise after grammar exercise with no relationship to actual communication, it's a waste of time. You're basically just doing amateur linguistics, not actual language learning. You don't need to be especially talented, you just need to be diligent and consistent. And you do need to learn lots of vocabulary, but you should be developing that as much as possible in real context. Although I'm not going to tell you not to memorize a big old list of words and just wait for context to activate them, Winter Soldier style. I do that sometimes. It works okay. Until next time, happy learning.